Seoul's early spring air carried the last chill of winter, but inside Café Bellagio, a luxury glass and wood hideaway tucked in the heart of Gangnam, the lighting was warm, the ambiance romantic, and the tension palpable. Yvonne Bennett stared at the man seated across from her. She hadn't expected to see him. She was supposed to be doing a favor, a ridiculous one. Minji had begged her that morning, barefoot, wrapped in a towel, mascara smudged under both eyes like war paint, over a plate of burnt toast and half a banana. "Honey, please, just this once. Pretend to be me and cancel the date." Yvonne looked up slowly from her tea. "Minji, I'm black. You're Korean. You think he's not gonna notice?" Minji blinked. "I told them I'd been abroad. Maybe he thinks I studied anthropology in Botswana or something. People change." "Right, people change." Yvonne set her cup down. "But not melanin levels, babe. That's not how study abroad works." Minji threw her arms toward the heavens. "It's a blind date. No photo, no bio, just vibes and trauma. Please, just go there. Flash your gorgeous cheekbones. Say something deep like, 'I'm moving to Norway to soul search,' and leave him in a gentle existential crisis." Yvonne stared. "Minji, that is the worst plan I've heard from you. And you once tried to fake an allergy to marriage." Minji gasped. "That was valid. I broke out in commitment hives." Yvonne narrowed her eyes. "Girl, he's gonna take one look at me and know I'm not you." Minji clasped her hands in full Kdrama heroine mode. "Then lie like a goddess. Be mysterious. Be devastating." Yvonne raised an eyebrow. "So, black femme fatale, for hire?" Minji nodded solemnly. "Exactly." Yvonne sighed deeply. "I swear to God, one day I'm writing a memoir called Minji Made Me Do It." Minji perked up. "Ooh, can I do the audiobook?" "Number, you'll ad-lib lies into the script." Yvonne grabbed her coat, muttering under her breath, "I'm too safe for this nonsense." But she still went. Because when your best friend is a melodramatic disaster with mascara-stained pleas and toaster fire energy, you show up. Even if you're showing up as her, against every shade of logic. Yvonne Bennett, born in Accra but raised in London, was not a woman who played games. At 29, she had built a quiet but rising career as a food anthropologist and global culinary consultant. She specialized in integrating diasporic African cuisine into fine dining and corporate menus, a niche that finally brought her to South Korea through a rare cultural partnership program. Her company had just been contracted by Han Global to consult on a new gourmet brand focused on fusion cuisine across Africa and Southeast Asia. She had no idea the man leading that new brand was the same man now looking at her with quiet amusement over a glass of sparkling water. He set the glass down slowly. "You're not Minji Kang." Yvonne blinked once. Cool, measured. "And you're not what I expected either." A pause. "I'm guessing this was a setup," he said, voice low, steady. His eyes, dark, sharp, unreadable, studied her with the kind of gaze that never rushed to blink. "You're not wrong," Yvonne admitted. "Your people match you with strangers. Mine guilt me into pretending to be them." He actually chuckled. "Fair enough." She hated how attractive he was. Tall, immaculately dressed in a navy suit that somehow looked casual on him, hair styled in a way that said, "I'm powerful, but not trying too hard." Every movement was calculated, but not stiff. Then again, what did she expect from Han Jae-won, the newly appointed CEO of Han Global, one of South Korea's most powerful corporate empires? What shook her more wasn't his presence. It was the fact that he didn't act surprised to see her. He should have been. Because just 3 days ago, she had met with his executive board over Zoom. The cameras were off. She had no idea which man was which. But he had seen her, clearly. Why hadn't he said anything? So, he said smoothly, should we pretend we don't know each other from a certain strategy meeting on Tuesday? She lifted her brow. Should you pretend you don't know your consultants' faces? I'm new, he replied lightly, still learning who's who. A lie. And now she was caught. On a fake date with her client. Her very important, potentially career-defining client. She could hear her professional ethics screaming in the back of her mind. I'll make this easy, she said, placing her napkin on the table. This was a favor for a friend. I didn't know you were you. Obviously, this is a conflict, so I'm leaving, and we'll never talk about this again. She stood. He didn't stop her, but just as she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Let's meet again, for real this time. Jaewon watched her go. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but his thoughts raced. He had planned for this meeting, not like this, but something close. What were the odds that the same Yvonne Bennett he had watched speak at a food summit in Paris 2 years ago would walk into his world like this? He had recognized her instantly, not just from the screen, from that memory. Paris, rain, her voice rising with passion as she spoke about the spiritual weight of ancestral cuisine. He had been spellbound then. He was spellbound now. He hadn't stopped thinking about her since. So when her name had landed in the consultant's shortlist, he had approved it without hesitation. He never expected to meet her on a blind date, but he wasn't letting her go that easily. Later that night, Yvonne lay in her apartment, staring at the message. She reread it 3 times. Let's meet again, for real this time. She could block him, pretend it didn't happen, but the way he looked at her, no arrogance, no fetishizing, just that unsettling calm, like he already knew something she didn't. In Ghana, her father used to say, when the past finds you, it's never by accident. It's either to finish a story or start one you were never meant to avoid. Yvonne exhaled. She didn't reply, not yet, but something told her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next time Yvonne saw him, it wasn't at a date table. It was at a boardroom table. 12 floors above the streets of Seoul, in a gleaming glass tower lined with minimalist art and stoic assistants, she sat at the far end of a conference table with her laptop open and her dignity braced like armor. The consulting contract with Han Global was entering phase 2. She was here to finalize the cultural integration strategy. But the moment Han Jae-won walked in, tall, self-assured, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like skin, her breath caught. He didn't look at her immediately. He greeted the room professionally, nodded at his assistant, then took the seat directly across from her. Only then did he meet her eyes. And he smiled. She didn't smile back. After the meeting ended, the other executives filed out. Jaewon stayed seated. So did Yvonne. Silence stretched between them like a taut thread. She was the first to speak. I didn't respond to your message. I noticed, he replied, unfazed. Then why are you smiling? Because I was hoping you'd come to this meeting. And now that you have, we can talk properly. Yvonne stood gathering her notes. There's nothing to talk about. That was a mistake. A bad blind date. Let's pretend it never happened. She started walking toward the door. He rose quietly. Yvonne, she turned. I need your help. Her brow arched. Help? He stepped closer. Not enough to intimidate, but enough to make the air between them change temperature. My father is relentless, he said. Every month he tries to arrange a new match, a marriage partner, a pawn in his dynasty, and every time I say no, he threatens to cut me off. Then cut him off first. I did, but he has power that reaches beyond the company. He has leverage, influence. The board listens to him. Yvonne narrowed her eyes. And this is my problem because last week I told him I was dating someone. Someone who wasn't from the usual world. Someone I chose. Yvonne blinked. Let me guess. You meant me. He nodded once. I was going to ask you formally, but the blind date sped things up. She stared at him in disbelief. So you want me to be your pretend girlfriend to keep your tyrant of a father at bay, while you, what? Continue running a multi-billion-dollar company with zero personal consequences? To be fair, he said, smiling thinly, I'm offering to compensate you. Not in money. Consider it contract stability. Your work with Han Global continues without interference. In fact, I'll personally see to it that your pilot project gets expanded. Her heart pounded. She hated how logical he sounded, how tempting it was. She crossed her arms. You think I'd sell myself for job security? I think you're pragmatic, he said calmly. You didn't come to Seoul to play safe. You came here to open doors, and I'm handing you the key to one. Later that night, she stood at her apartment window, watching the city blur in lights and distant sirens. She wasn't that girl who got caught up in games. She had built her name from the ground up. People had tried to box her in, dismiss her, use her as a token, but she hadn't bowed then, and she wasn't going to now. But Han Global wasn't just a client. It was the client, the one that would open international doors, the one that could fund her future foundation for diaspora culinary studies. She couldn't afford to lose it, not when she was this close. The next morning, she entered his office without knocking. Jae-won looked up from his desk, calm, waiting. I have conditions, she said flatly. He leaned back. I'm listening. Don't lie to me. Not about your father, not about what this is, not about what you expect. His expression flickered, just for a moment, then settled into something serious. I won't lie to you. Yvonne crossed her arms. This is a professional arrangement, Jae-won. Nothing more. Understood. She turned to leave. But Yvonne, he added, voice low. She paused. I don't do anything halfway. The fake relationship began that weekend. Their first public date was in Samcheong-dong, under cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom. Yvonne wore a deep emerald trench coat, sunglasses, and a half-hearted smile. Jae-won walked beside her with a hand tucked casually into his coat pocket. But whenever he looked at her, the look in his eyes wasn't casual at all. They visited a gallery, then a tea house. The media had been tipped off, not by him, but by his cousin, who thought it would add authenticity. A photo of them ended up on a gossip blog the next day. Han Global CEO seen with mysterious foreign beauty. Afterward, at the car, she turned to him. You're enjoying this too much. He didn't deny it. I like making it believable. Yvonne stared at him. You act like you've done this before. I haven't. Then why are you so good at it? Jae-won smiled faintly. Maybe because I'm not pretending as much as you think. But tension simmered beneath their polished smiles. Every time he leaned closer, her breath hitched, annoyed at herself. Every time she smiled at him in public, a part of her felt something dangerous tug at her chest. He made every date feel real. Too real. He remembered her favorite flower after just one mention, brought it to her in a pocket-sized press before their second outing. He made reservations at a restaurant that served Ghanaian fusion, even though it wasn't on the itinerary. He laughed when she challenged his views. He watched her when she wasn't looking. It was all for show, she reminded herself. All pretend. Except it didn't feel like pretending. Not anymore. Yvonne stood in Jae-won's office alone, waiting for him to return from an impromptu call with the chairman. The space was pristine, minimalist, elegant, exactly what she expected from a man like him. But beneath the expensive finishes and curated art, There was something too polished, too quiet. It didn't feel like a place someone lived in. It felt like a place someone performed in. She walked slowly to the bookshelf near the window. It held no personal items, just a blend of academic texts, corporate leadership manuals, and some rare culinary volumes. That surprised her. A black and gold frame tucked behind one row caught her eye. It wasn't meant to be seen. She reached for it. The photo was worn, slightly faded, but the image clear enough. A young black man, smiling, arms crossed confidently, standing beside a Korean woman in her early 20s. She wore a soft cream dress, her hair long and undone, laughing at something off camera. Her hand rested lightly, familiarly, on the man's shoulder. Yvonne's breath caught. The man looked familiar. The longer she stared, the harder her heart beat. The features, the posture. She'd seen photos of her father in that same decade, same age. Her thoughts were spiraling when the door clicked behind her. Jaewon entered, expression unreadable, but his gaze fell instantly on the frame in her hand. She didn't hide it. "You keep this behind books," she said, without turning. He closed the door slowly. "I don't like explaining it." She finally turned to face him. "Then don't make it visible." He walked forward calmly, stopping a few steps away. "My mother, and a colleague from her university days in Ghana." Her eyes flicked up sharply. "Your mother studied in Ghana?" "For 1 year, humanitarian studies, long before she married my father." He said it smoothly, too smoothly. "And the man?" "A professor," he said, but his eyes didn't leave the frame, not for a second. Yvonne held the photo between them. "Your mother looks happy." She was, back then. He looked away finally, but not before she saw it. The crack. Not grief, guilt, a long silence. Yvonne returned the frame to the shelf, but not behind the books. She set it in the open. "I like it better there," she said softly. Jaewon didn't respond. Instead, he moved to the window, hands in his pockets, back straight. He was wearing that same tailored calm, but the air between them had shifted. Something old lived in this room, something he didn't want to name. Yvonne picked up her bag. "I should go." He turned. "You're not staying for the next strategy session?" "I've sent my notes ahead. I don't think today's the day for pretending." Her tone was even, but the words held weight. "Yvonne." She paused at the door. "You're reading into something that isn't there." She turned her head slowly. "Am I?" A beat of silence. He looked away first. That night, in her apartment, Yvonne opened a photo folder her mother had sent a few months before. Family archives, scanned copies. She flipped past cousins, aunties, her father's PhD ceremony. Then she saw it. Her father, younger, arms crossed, laughing, same smile, same posture, same eyes as the man in the photo on Jaewon's shelf. Her stomach twisted. Her father had never mentioned Korea. She shut the laptop. She didn't know what was happening yet, but something was. And it had started long before she ever met Han Jaewon. Yvonne had dressed with intention. Simple, elegant, and unapologetically herself. A floor-length navy dress with subtle gold earrings. Her hair swept back in a soft crown of natural coils. She didn't want to shrink, but she wasn't there to impress either. Jaewon's cryptic text from the night before hadn't offered much preparation. "My father asked to meet you. He doesn't ask twice. Dinner, 7 p.m., our family estate. Please come." Now she sat in a car pulling through a private gate, guarded by black-suited men and cold marble lions. The Han family estate stood like something out of a period drama. traditional Korean architecture expanded by modern glass wings, a fusion of empire and pretense. Jae-won met her at the entrance, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he said, voice quiet. "You look worried." He offered a half smile. "I am." Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. No laughter, no warmth, just the echo of shoes against polished wood. They were led to a private dining room. And there he was, Chairman Han Byung-sik, a living monument to power. He stood slowly, tall and lean, with silver hair slicked back and a gaze that didn't blink. "Yvonne Bennett," he said without offering a bow or handshake. "A unique name." Yvonne dipped her head politely. "It was my grandfather's. Ghanaian. I assumed. I did some reading." He gestured to the table. "Please, sit." Dinner was a 5-course performance, served in icy silence by staff who barely looked up. The chairman spoke rarely, and only to assess. "Is your family political?" "No," Yvonne replied calmly. "Mostly academics." "Ah, but not local to London, I imagine." "My parents met in Ghana. I was raised between Accra and Brixton." "I see. And you came to Korea. Why?" "I was invited," she said evenly, "based on my work." He hummed. "That's impressive." She felt the sharp edge beneath the compliment. Halfway through the meal, he asked, "And your plans with my son, are they serious?" Yvonne blinked. "You'd have to ask your son." Chairman Han smiled without warmth. "He doesn't speak plainly about such things." Jae-won finally cut in. "Appa, this isn't a business meeting." "It's always a business meeting," the chairman said. "Everything has consequences, including distractions." Yvonne didn't flinch, but her grip on the chopsticks tightened. The next course arrived, ginseng soup with abalone, and with it, silence again, until Chairman Han added casually, as if commenting on the weather, "I was once engaged to a woman who studied abroad, very spirited, very naive. She thought love outranked legacy." He looked directly at Yvonne. She was mistaken. The meal ended shortly after. Jae-won escorted Yvonne out, but excused himself briefly, called into a side room by one of the aides. She waited in the foyer, and that's when she heard it. The door wasn't fully closed. Chairman Han's voice was low, but cutting. "You're making the same mistake I made, Jae-won. I warned you about sentiment. You are not free to choose." Jae-won's voice replied, tense. "She's not a mistake." "You think you're different from me? You think this is a movie?" The chairman scoffed. "If you bring shame on this family, I will erase her, just like I erased the last one." A silence. Then, "She doesn't know, does she? That this game has already cost someone everything." Jae-won didn't answer, and that silence was enough. Yvonne turned and walked, quietly, quickly, out to the courtyard where the car was waiting. She didn't speak until they were halfway back to Seoul. Then, softly, "You should have told me what I was walking into." Jae-won didn't look at her. His voice was tight. "I thought I could protect you from it." "You were wrong." That night, she typed the termination clause of her consulting contract 3 times before deleting it. The 4th time, she opened her phone and called her project liaison. "I'd like to pause my work with Han Global," she said, "personal reasons." The next morning, she awoke to a knock on her apartment door. It was Jae-won. No guards, no car, just him, in a coat too thin for the weather, face drawn, eyes exhausted. "You're scared," he said simply. "I'm cautious," she replied, "and I have every right to be. I didn't know he'd threaten you directly. I didn't know he'd bring up the past." She folded her arms. What past, Jaewon? He looked at her for a long moment, and then, quietly, brokenly. Someone else once tried to love me. My father buried her career, her visa, her name, a beat. He can't do that to you. I won't let him. Yvonne stepped back, tension still in her body, but something else stirring beneath it. You can't fix this with flowers and private cars. I'm not a performance. I know, he said. I need the truth. He nodded slowly. Then come back. Not for him, for me, and I'll give it to you. The apartment smelled like sesame oil, garlic, and something unexpectedly warm. Suya pepper. Yvonne blinked as she stepped inside. Are you cooking? Jaewon stood barefoot in the open kitchen, sleeves rolled, head slightly tilted as he stirred something in a wide, shallow pot. Sort of, he said without looking up, experimenting. She walked slowly toward the counter, setting her bag down. You invited me over for dinner, but forgot to mention it was you doing the cooking. I didn't forget, he said, glancing at her. I just didn't want you to say no. A smile ghosted across her lips, but faded just as quickly. You're quiet, he noted. Yvonne leaned against the kitchen island. I've had a lot on my mind. Your father's threat. This situation. He nodded, eyes lowering back to the pot. I owe you a truth, he said after a moment. Several, actually. He plated the dish gently. Doenjang jjigae, thick and fragrant, but the broth was deepened by spices Yvonne recognized instantly. Smoked paprika, ground ginger, cayenne, and something earthy, West African nutmeg. She stared. He slid the bowl toward her. Try it. She lifted the spoon, took one bite, then another. Her eyes widened. You mixed Ghanaian stew spice into fermented soybean paste? I asked a chef friend in Accra for the blend. Said I was cooking for someone important. She met his gaze. This is bold. So are you, he said simply. They ate in near silence, the tension thicker than the steam curling from their bowls. Finally, Yvonne set her spoon down. Start talking, she said. Jaewon exhaled, pushing his bowl aside. He stood, walked toward the window, then turned back, leaning against the frame like he needed something to hold him up. My mother studied abroad in Ghana in the early 90s. It was supposed to be one semester, human rights, community work, but it turned into something else. Yvonne's breath caught. She met a man, not a student, a local professor, brilliant, quiet, protective. She said he taught her how to think freely, how to stand on her own. He paused, and then there was political unrest, riots. She was nearly caught in one. He pulled her out of a mob and hid her for 3 days in a village outside Kumasi. Jaewon's eyes flicked to Yvonne's. She told me that's when she knew she loved him. Yvonne was frozen, her spine straight, her eyes locked on his. But her family called her back. There was already pressure. Her father had arranged a marriage to my father, even before she left Korea. She didn't tell anyone. She just obeyed. Silence. Then, before she died, she left a box of letters, old photos, notes she never mailed, and in one of them, she wrote, Charles Bennett saved my life in every way a life can be saved. I owe him more than I'll ever be allowed to give. The room tilted. Yvonne felt her knees weaken. She gripped the edge of the counter. What did you say? Jaewon didn't move. His name, she said, voice hollow. What was his name? He met her eyes. The quiet devastation there was unmistakable. Charles Bennett, a beat. Your father. The sound that left Yvonne's throat wasn't a word. It was a breath ripped into shards. She turned away sharply, hands braced on the counter, her mind spiraling. Memories came like waves. Her father's quiet strength, his long stares out the window when he thought no one was looking, his refusal to speak about his 20s, how he would tear up every time she talked about studying in West Africa. "No," she whispered. "That's not... You don't know that." "I do. He never told me. I think he was trying to protect you." Yvonne spun around, eyes blazing. "From what? A past he buried? A woman he couldn't save?" "No," Jaewon said, stepping forward carefully. "From a truth that would bring pain and no answers. That's what our parents left us. Silence." She covered her mouth, trying to breathe. He didn't touch her. He didn't dare. "I didn't bring you here to confuse you," he said. "I brought you here to tell you the truth. Because you deserve it. Not as a consultant. Not as a woman, He stopped himself. She looked up. "Say it." He swallowed. "Not as a woman I'm falling for. As someone whose father gave my mother the only joy she ever knew." Her voice cracked. "You lied. You told me he was just a professor. A colleague." "I didn't know how to tell you the truth then. But I do now." Yvonne backed toward the door, eyes shimmering. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is history. This is legacy. This is..." Her voice broke. "My father." Jaewon said nothing. He let her go. Because this was a storm she needed to walk through alone. The world outside was drenched in silver rain, soft and relentless against the windows of Jaewon's apartment. Inside, silence wrapped around Yvonne like a second skin, heavy, unspoken, waiting to break. She sat on the edge of his leather couch, spine stiff, knees locked, while Jaewon moved slowly across the room toward a locked wooden drawer beneath a glass cabinet. His shoulders were tense, like he was bracing for war. When he returned, he held a single envelope in both hands, yellowed at the edges, the ink faint with age. Yvonne could see the words scribbled across the front to Charles Bennett. "In case I never see you again." Her throat tightened. "Where did you find this?" she asked, voice low. Jaewon knelt before the coffee table and set it down carefully. "In a locked compartment of my mother's vanity, just after her funeral." "You opened it?" "It had my name written on the back, and a note, 'Don't read this unless you've lost me completely.'" He paused, then slid it closer to her. "I think you should read it." Yvonne stared at the letter for a long time before finally picking it up. Her fingers trembled slightly. She unfolded the delicate page and read, "Charles, I don't know if this will reach you. I doubt it ever will. But writing is the only way I can breathe right now. You once told me love should never be a secret, that we dishonor it when we pretend it never happened. But they forced me to pretend. They took my passport. They erased every trace of you. I'm to marry a man I barely know for reasons that reek of empire and shame. They told me I would forget you, that I should, but I haven't. I never will. I loved you. I love you still. And if I ever have a child, if God ever lets me bring something good into this cruel world, I'll teach him what love without violence looks like. I'll teach him what you taught me, Yoon Mi Young." Yvonne didn't realize she was crying until the page blurred. She lowered it slowly. "You said..." "She never sent it?" "She didn't," Jaewon replied quietly. "I don't think she was allowed to." Yvonne nodded numbly, tears streaming now. "My father never told me. He never even mentioned Korea. Not once." Jaewon's expression was gentle but wrecked. Maybe he thought it would bring more pain than peace. "No," she said, breath shaking. "No, you don't get to romanticize this. You..." She stood, the letter clenched in her fist, fury blooming beneath grief. Did you hire me to finish her love story, or to erase your guilt? The question hung between them like a blade. Jaewon flinched but didn't look away. I didn't hire you for either, he said. But when I saw your name, when I saw you, I knew I couldn't pretend the story wasn't real. I needed to know what was lost and what was still here. Yvonne's voice cracked. You should have told me. From the first meeting, you should have told me the truth. I was afraid you'd leave. I would have left, she snapped, because I didn't come here to be someone's unfinished chapter or someone's moral repair. I don't want to repair the past, he said quietly. I want to honor it and then let it go. She stared at him. So many feelings clashed inside her. Rage, heartbreak, the aching confusion of being connected to a love that wasn't hers, but now lived in her blood anyway. She dropped into the chair, hands over her face. I don't know what to do with this, she whispered. I don't even know what it means. He moved slowly to sit across from her, not touching, not pressing, just present. It means your father was loved, Jaewon said softly. It means mine never got the chance. A long pause. It means we don't have to carry their silence anymore. Yvonne closed her eyes, the letter still in her lap. Somewhere deep inside her, something cracked, and light began to bleed through. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Korea's skies brooded dark and low, thunder rumbling in the distance like a warning. Yvonne sat on the edge of Minji's bed in an oversized hoodie and leggings, her hair pulled into a loose bun that had given up hours ago. Her phone sat face down on the floor. It had buzzed 5 times since she got there, all from the same name. She hadn't answered once. So, let me get this straight, Minji said slowly, placing a mug of hot tea on the bedside table. Your fake CEO boyfriend might be the son of the woman your father was once in love with, and he found a letter connecting all of you and never told you until you were already emotionally involved? Yvonne nodded silently. Minji blinked. Kdrama's wish. Yvonne gave a weak laugh and wiped her face. I know how this sounds. It sounds like trauma wrapped in romance, with a side of generational pain. I'm serious. So am I. Minji paused. Do you still have feelings for him? Yvonne didn't answer right away. Then, I don't know what I feel. It's like I inherited a heartbreak I never asked for. That night, she texted Jaewon, this arrangement is over. For good. I'm stepping away from the project and from you. Please don't contact me again. She didn't wait for a reply. Chairman Han Byung-shik stood before the board of directors with the ease of a man used to commanding empires. The Ghana project is to be suspended indefinitely, he said, voice crisp. We've decided to part ways with Ms. Bennett, effective immediately. A murmur swept through the room. In the corner, Jaewon entered late, rain still clinging to his coat. He strode past assistants and executives, ignoring his father's glare. You don't have the authority to make that decision unilaterally, Jaewon said flatly. The room quieted. Chairman Han turned. I'm the chairman of this company. That authority is inherent. Jaewon stepped forward. You forged a case against an international consultant. You're trying to have her deported by pushing a visa irregularity report through the Ministry of Labor. Tell me, how is that not abuse of power? The air snapped. One executive choked slightly on his tea. The chairman's jaw tightened. She is a liability, a foreigner, a scandal in waiting. She's my consultant, Jaewon shot back, and I won't let you destroy her because she threatens your illusion of control. Chairman Han took one slow step forward. You're still thinking with your mother's weakness. You always have. No, Jaewon replied, voice low and cold. I'm thinking with her courage. a beat. You erased one woman from your legacy. I will not let you erase another. 2 hours later, Yvonne received a notice from immigration. Her visa was suddenly flagged for investigative review. Travel restrictions applied. Work authorization suspended. She sat at Minji's kitchen table staring at the screen. Her hands were numb. "They're trying to bury me," she whispered. Jae-won showed up the next morning with documents in hand. "I've already spoken to the ministry. They're scared of my father, but they're more scared of the press." Yvonne stared at him from the doorway. She looked tired, hollow, strong but breaking. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to be. I told you." "And I heard you," he said, stepping inside. "But if I walk away now, then everything he said about power being greater than truth becomes real." He set the file down. "I filed a public record this morning, declaring full responsibility for the consultant partnership. I cleared your name. You're safe." Yvonne swallowed hard. "You went against him?" "I went for you." She didn't say thank you, didn't say anything. But when she sat beside him and opened the file, their shoulders touched. And for one long, silent moment, she didn't move away. Meanwhile, in a private room deep within the Han estate, Chairman Han poured himself a drink and stared at an old photo tucked inside a locked drawer. A photo of Yoon Mi-young and Charles Bennett. He crushed the glass in his hand. "You couldn't let her go, and now your daughters come to finish what you started." He turned to his assistant. "Break them, quietly, thoroughly, and make sure she never works in this country again." Back in Accra, Ghana. The air was heavy with mango and dust. Yvonne stood in her father's old study, barefoot on worn wooden floors, fingers grazing the edge of her father's old desk. The room hadn't changed much since he passed. Books still stacked, half-labeled folders tucked in drawers, journals lining the shelves and worn leather covers that still carried the faint smell of ink and tobacco. The fan above her creaked as it spun. Outside, the call to prayer echoed from a nearby mosque. But Yvonne heard nothing. She was somewhere else, deep in the fragments of a past she never knew she'd inherited. She opened the third drawer, pulled out the second journal, the one he used after returning from London in the early 90s. The spine cracked softly in her hands. It was halfway through the journal that she found it. Folded once, tucked carefully between pages. Yellowed like parchment, still untouched. Her breath caught as she read the first line, Mi-young. She sat down slowly, hands trembling, and read her father's words aloud in a whisper. Voice raw. Mi-young. I don't know if this letter will ever leave my hands. Maybe I've already lost you forever. Or maybe I've never truly found the courage to let go. But I want to believe that God still hears the cries we bury in silence. I loved you. Fiercely. The kind of love that left marks on the soul. But love wasn't enough to protect you. Not from the weight of your name. Your family didn't just take you back. They buried the woman you were becoming. You told me once that if you ever had a child, you'd teach him what love without violence looked like. I pray you did. I pray he knows you weren't weak. You were stolen. I couldn't fight your world, but maybe one day, someone braver than us will. And maybe she'll be mine. Minus Charles. Yvonne pressed the letter to her chest. She couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down silently. All this time, her father hadn't forgotten. He had just chosen not to pass down the burden. But now, that burden was hers. Not to carry, to confront, to break. Seoul, South Korea. 2 days later, the press conference was held at a modest public venue, intentionally chosen to avoid corporate gloss and grandeur. Cameras clicked, journalists murmured, but the room hushed when Han Jae-won stepped onto the podium. No suit, no branding, just a crisp white shirt and a folded letter in his hand. He didn't read from a speech. He didn't need to. My name is Han Jae-won. Until this morning, I served as the CEO of Han Global's Culinary Innovation Division. As of now, I resign, fully, irrevocably. Gasps rippled. He raised the letter. I am here today not to smear a name, but to confront a history that was always hidden from the very people our company claims to serve. My mother, Yoon Mi-young, studied in Ghana during her youth. She fell in love with the man who saved her life during political unrest. His name was Charles Bennett. A hush fell deeper. They were separated, not by choice, but by force, by shame, and by the power of the Han family name. My father, Chairman Han Byung-shik, orchestrated the erasure of that chapter of her life, and in doing so, built a legacy that exploited African partnerships while silencing African stories. Our company's expansion into West Africa wasn't built on equality. It was built on imperial nostalgia, on dominance disguised as diplomacy, and I will no longer be part of it. Cameras flashed, questions erupted, but Jae-won didn't flinch. If we are going to speak about cultural fusion, then let us also speak about cultural theft. If we are going to profit from global flavors, then let us also honor the hands that birthed them. And if I must lose everything to tell the truth, then so be it. He stepped away from the podium, and the room exploded. Later that night, Yvonne sat on the edge of her hotel bed in Accra, watching the live stream replay on her phone. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "You did it." The same man who once begged her to fake love had now stood before the world and burned down his inheritance. Not for a headline, not for pity, but for truth. He had chosen it, and she felt it in her chest like a thunderclap. Minji called within minutes. "Yvonne, are you watching this? Girl, he just detonated the entire Han brand. That boardroom is going to be a crime scene by morning." Yvonne gave a soft, stunned laugh. "I know. Do you realize what he just gave up? For real?" "I do. You okay?" Yvonne stared at the ceiling. "No, but I think I'm finally breathing." She called him that night. It was the first time they'd spoken since she walked away. He answered after one ring. "Yvonne." His voice was quiet, stripped down, tired but alive. She didn't speak for a moment, just listened to the sound of his breathing. "I read my father's letter," she said finally. He remembered her. He never stopped. Jae-won exhaled shakily. "Then he did more than mine ever did. I don't think they expected us to meet." "No," he said, "but I think they'd be proud we didn't run from it." She hesitated, then softly, "You burned the bridge behind you." "I had to," he said, "to find out if what's in front of me was real." Her voice barely held. "And what do you see now?" A pause. Then, "A woman who walked into my life, carrying a past I tried to bury, and gave it breath. A woman who made me choose between legacy and conviction, and I chose her." Yvonne closed her eyes. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I'll wait. As long as it takes. This time, I'm not running." The storm in Seoul finally broke that night. But between Ghana and Korea, something else broke open too. A silence. And the chains of a love story that was never allowed to live. Until now. Accra, Ghana. 3 months later, Yvonne stood in front of a weathered colonial-era building in the heart of the city where the sea breeze carried salt and spice in equal measure. The sign above the arched entryway read, "The Grace Table, Institute of Diaspora Culinary Arts and Memory." It wasn't finished yet. There were still tiles to be replaced, windows to reinforce, paperwork to finalize, but the soul of it was there, in the smell of the test kitchen's slow-cooking egusi stew, in the laughter of women teaching apprentices how to grind spice blends by hand, in the warmth of a room where no one's food was called foreign ever again. Yvonne stepped inside, clipboard in hand, but her heart was somewhere else. Always, now, it drifted between timelines, between recipes and reckonings, between her father's silence and Jaewon's absence. After the press conference, he'd vanished from Seoul. No social media, no interviews, just one message. I need to be nothing for a while, but I will become something honest. For you, for me, for him. Jeju Island, South Korea. In a small coastal village where the ocean whispered against black volcanic stone, Jaewon was nobody. He wore secondhand jeans and washed dishes after morning services at a humble local church. The children at the orphanage called him Hyung, not CEO. The locals knew he was the pastor's quiet friend from the mainland. That was all. He didn't correct them. He didn't need to. Every morning, he rose before the sun and sat by the garden wall with a worn Bible cracked open in his lap. Not to impress God, but to ask him, "Who am I if I'm no longer Han?" He read slowly, often aloud, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." He read with the desperation of a man who had spent years wearing a crown made of iron and now longed only for linen and breath. One afternoon, Pastor Kang sat beside him with 2 cups of barley tea. "You remind me of someone," the older man said, passing over the cup. Jaewon gave a tired smile. "Please don't say Paul. I was going to say Jonah, but that works too." Jaewon chuckled softly. "Running from Nineveh? No, from your reflection." Silence settled. Then Pastor Kang added, "Don't be ashamed of the truth, son. You told it bravely, and it cost you. But sometimes, God has to empty our hands before he gives us something that won't burn." Accra. In Yvonne's office, Yvonne read through the grant papers with cautious excitement. An international arts foundation was offering her $250,000 in seed funding to lead a global documentation initiative. Lost diaspora recipes, preserving the unwritten history of taste. It was everything she dreamed of. It also terrified her, because it meant building something permanent, and permanence demanded faith. That night, she sat on the Institute's rooftop, writing in her journal under a sky streaked with stars. "You would have liked this place, Daddy," she wrote. "It's built on truth, on memory, on flavors that refuse to die quietly, just like her, just like me." She paused, then added, "And he's still out there, somewhere by the sea, still becoming." Jeju. Late one night. Jaewon knelt in the small chapel, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across his face. He didn't pray with eloquence. He prayed with hunger. "Lord, I've lost so many things I thought I needed. But if there's one thing left for me, let it be a life that bears good fruit." He pressed his forehead to the cold wooden pew. "Let me be worthy of the story I've stepped into, even if she never returns." And somewhere between Ghana's heat and Jeju's wind, 2 hearts beat in parallel, not chasing each other, but walking their own paths of redemption, until God saw fit to cross them again. The kitchen at the grace table smelled of roasted ginger and crushed cloves. Yvonne moved slowly through the sun-warmed space, adjusting the angle of a spice rack, checking the simmer of a stock pot. watching an intern practice how to pour palm oil without overpowering a dish. The windows were open. Laughter drifted in from the garden below, where students were harvesting herbs for the day's cooking lab. It should have felt like peace. It did, in pieces. Yvonne was reviewing the week's schedule when Minji's voice echoed from the hallway. "Yvonne, turn on the TV! Channel 4, quick!" She barely looked up. Is it politics again? No, it's him. That made her freeze. Yvonne's hand hovered mid-air before slowly reaching for the remote. The screen flickered on, and there he was. Jeju Island. Charity broadcast. It wasn't the polished Jaewon she remembered. No tailored suit, no branded microphone. He stood beneath a white banner with a faded logo. Hearts of bread, serving the least of these. His sleeves were rolled up, hands flour-dusted from making dumplings with the kids around him. A child tugged on his sleeve mid-interview. He crouched, tied the boy's undone shoelace, and smiled without realizing cameras were still rolling. His hair was longer, his face leaner. But what struck her most was his stillness. The host continued. Joining us today is Han Jae-won, formerly of Han Global, now just Hyung Jae-won, as the children here call him. The interviewer chuckled, but Jae-won didn't deflect with charm. He answered with quiet sincerity. I used to believe influence meant power. Now I think it just means responsibility, what you choose to carry, and what you're willing to lay down for others. The camera panned to the children kneading dough behind him. We don't talk about money here. We talk about stories, about nourishment, about becoming whole. Yvonne slowly sat down, stunned. Her throat tightened. This man, this was not an heir seeking redemption through spectacle. This was someone who had lost everything and somehow gained himself. She turned off the screen and sat in the quiet. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something waiting. That night, she walked into the unfinished chapel at the back of the institute, a dusty room with no pews yet, just a wooden stool and an open window. The moonlight spilled in like an invitation. She hadn't prayed in months. Not really. Maybe not since her father died. But tonight, her knees bent before her thoughts could stop her. She clasped her hands, leaned forward, and whispered, God, I want to believe this isn't all pain. I want to believe that the things you allow to break us aren't meant to destroy us. That love, even the kind that's rooted in suffering, can still grow something holy. She exhaled, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was talking to herself. Jeju Island. That same night, the wind moved in long, whispering pulses over the cliffs beyond the orphanage. Jae-won stood at the chapel's side door, barefoot, hoodie unzipped, a clay cup of warm barley tea cooling in his hand. The night air was cold, but not biting. Stillness wrapped around him like a cloak. He hadn't slept well for weeks, not because of regret. He had made peace with the fire he'd walked through, but there was still longing, not just for her, but for something eternal, something that wouldn't leave when the press did. He stepped into the empty chapel, dimly lit by a single votive candle on the wooden altar. No music, no sermon, just presence. He sat in the second row, leaned forward and whispered, I don't know where she is tonight, but I know she's thinking. I just want her to feel safe, even if I'm not there. He paused. The silence didn't answer. It enveloped. He closed his eyes, bowed his head. Lord, if you're still guiding me, then let her hear you too. A breeze moved through the open window at that moment, light and sudden. It brushed his face, and something inside him stilled, like breath that had been held for too long was finally released. He didn't know yet that halfway across the world, Yvonne was on her knees whispering her own surrender. But he felt it, not as a sound, but as peace, as if some invisible thread between them had been pulled taut again, like prayer, echoing across oceans, had found its twin. He stood slowly, left the tea untouched, and walked back into the night, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders no longer as heavy. And as he looked up at the stars above Jeju's quiet coast, he whispered, "Thank you." Accra, Ghana. 3 days later. A new plaque appeared in the entrance hall of the grace table, hand-carved, etched in gold leaf. It read, "Food as restoration. Man shall not live by bread alone." Below it was the verse reference, Matthew 4:4. From that day forward, prayer became part of the Institute's rhythm, quiet but real. They prayed before cooking. They blessed the hands that kneaded and stirred. They welcomed each person not as a beneficiary, but as a guest at God's table. That night, Yvonne wrote in her journal, "He became quiet, and in that quiet, I heard God again." Maybe grace isn't loud. Maybe it's just faithful. The grand auditorium at the University of Ghana was packed beyond capacity. Scholars, chefs, diplomats, and students from across the diaspora had gathered for the annual Global Food Summit, themed this year, Memory on the Table. Yvonne stood center stage, her long ochre dress moving like a second breath, her curls wrapped in a golden scarf that gleamed beneath the lights. But it wasn't the outfit that held the audience. It was the weight of her voice, the stillness of her truth. "When we speak of food, we often speak of culture," she said, her hands calm. "But we don't always speak of grief. We don't speak of recipes lost in ships, ingredients renamed by force, traditions labeled primitive until they became exotic, enough to profit from. But food remembers, even when people forget. It remembers the fire, the exile, the faith. And if we let it, food can become not just a bridge, but a balm." Her voice softened, but carried fire. "I was once told that restoration begins with truth. And today, I choose to believe that truth, spoken, cooked, passed down, is holy." The room rose in applause. Some clapped, some wept, some stood, not because it was expected, but because they felt something had been poured into them. Yvonne stepped away from the podium with a quiet dignity that no longer needed validation. She didn't look for anyone in the crowd. She knew who wasn't there. At least, she thought she knew. Outside, the sky had opened into a gentle downpour, thick drops landing in warm bursts across the stone courtyard. She walked into it anyway. The conference hall buzzed behind her, but the moment she stepped into the open air, it all went quiet. She stopped. Because he was there, standing just beyond the steps, under the weight of the rain like it didn't matter, soaked through but unflinching. Jaewon. His hair was dripping, curls beginning to form against his forehead. He held a wooden box in his hands, polished, carved, small enough to carry, heavy enough to matter. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The rain whispered between them. She took a step forward, breath caught somewhere between her ribs. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, barely louder than the storm. He swallowed, then lifted the box slightly, "To return what never belonged to me." Yvonne stepped closer, slowly, like each movement required permission from her own heart. "What is that?" He opened it. Inside, neatly folded in linen, were 2 letters, one from his mother, the other from her father, and beneath them a small pendant, an antique, made of carved ebony and jade. two broken halves mended with gold in the middle. It was in the bottom of her journal, he said quietly, a piece of something they tried to start and never got to finish. I didn't come to fix anything, he added, voice hoarse. I came because I realized something. We are not our parents' ghosts, but maybe we were always meant to finish the healing they couldn't. Yvonne stared at the pendant. Her hands trembled. You kept all this time? He nodded. I prayed every day you'd be the one to decide what to do with it. Not me, not him, not her, you. Her eyes welled with tears. She closed the box gently. You've changed, she whispered. So have you. She looked at him, soaked, steady, waiting. I don't know if I can do this again, she confessed. I'm not asking you to. He stepped forward, barely an inch between them now. I'm asking if I can walk beside you this time. Not ahead, not behind, just with. Thunder cracked faintly in the distance. She let out a long breath, and then, finally, smiled. A real one. Software certain. Scared. Brave. Oh, you're really dramatic, you know that? She murmured, stepping into him, the rain clinging to her skin. He chuckled, eyes misted. Only when it matters. She looked down at the box once more, then up at him. Let's start something they never got to finish. But we'll do it our way. Slow, with faith, and with fire. And beneath a rain-drenched sky in the land where truth first bloomed, they embraced, not to rekindle the past, but to write a future that finally tasted like grace. They returned to her guest house just before midnight. The rain had slowed, but the scent of wet earth still clung to the walls and windows, thick with peace and memory. Yvonne had changed into a soft robe, her curls damp, face free of anything but truth. Jae-woon sat cross-legged on the floor beside the low coffee table, towel draped over his shoulders, the wooden box resting between them. No music played, no wine was poured. The silence was reverent, not awkward, like something sacred had entered the room, and neither wanted to speak too loudly for fear of disturbing it. Yvonne finally asked, "When did you decide to bring it?" Jae-woon looked at the box, then at her. The moment I stopped asking God to give me a second chance and started asking him how to love without expectation. He opened it carefully. Inside, she saw it again. His mother's final words, folded neatly and pressed with dried rose petals. His resignation papers, with his signature, time-stamped the day he exposed his father to the world. And at the very bottom, wrapped in muslin, a small ring. Unpolished, unconventional, a carved band made of ebony and inlaid gold. Old, handcrafted, flawed in places, whole. Her eyes widened. He didn't take it out, didn't kneel, didn't force anything. He just looked at her and said, voice trembling, I don't want to rewrite their story. I want to start ours, if you'll have me. Yvonne felt her heartbeat stutter in her chest. I thought you said this wasn't a movie, she whispered, trying to steady her voice. It's not, he said softly. There's no background music, no dramatic cut to black. Just you, me, a storm, and a box full of choices. She reached for the ring, her fingers tracing its rough edges. This isn't new, she murmured. No, it belonged to her, my mother. She wore it the day she left Ghana. She kept it even after they forced the engagement. I think it was the only part of herself she refused to let go of. Yvonne swallowed. And now you're giving it to me? He shook his head. I'm offering it. You can take it, or close the box. Either way, I'll walk beside you, as your partner, your friend, or your quiet helper in the kitchen. Just let me stay near your fire, Her eyes welled, not from shock, from recognition. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about redeeming what was left of it. She looked down at her hand, at the ring, at the man who once hid behind charm and titles, now stripped down to soul and silence. She lifted the ring, but didn't put it on. Instead, she whispered, "If we do this, we do it with faith, not fear. We fight clean. We forgive slow. We build something they would have never dared to believe possible." He nodded, eyes glassy. "With God as our witness." She smiled, then slipped the ring onto her own finger, not as a final chapter, but as the first line of something entirely new. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They just leaned their foreheads together in the glow of candlelight and said nothing. Because sometimes grace speaks loudest in stillness. The storm had long passed. Outside the guest house in Accra, the trees dripped in silence. A fan spun lazily in the ceiling above them. The wooden floor creaked each time one of them shifted on the cushions, but neither moved much. They had been sitting like this for hours, cross-legged, facing each other. No phones, no music, just conversation. The kind that scraped gently at scar tissue, the kind that unspooled the knots slowly, like threads softened by prayer. Yvonne sipped her hibiscus tea and tucked her legs beneath her. "I used to think healing would feel like triumph," she said quietly, big, loud, like I'd walk out of the fire holding someone's head in my hands. Jaewon smiled faintly. "And now?" She looked down at her tea, then up at him. "Now I think healing feels like this, like sitting in the quiet with someone who doesn't need to fix me, just see me." He didn't speak for a moment, then said, "I've spent most of my life performing sincerity. You're the first person I've ever told the truth without script or spin." Yvonne looked at him. "You've spent most of your life being a brand, not a man." He nodded. She set her mug down and leaned forward slightly, her tone shifting from warmth to weight. "If this is going to work," she said carefully, "it needs to be built on something holy." He didn't hesitate. "Then let's build it on truth and God." A long silence passed between them, but it was full of something sacred, not tension, reverence, like they'd both stepped barefoot into something fragile and eternal. Yvonne reached for a folded cloth journal beside her. Inside were handwritten notes, reflections on food and faith, diaspora and dignity, scripture she hadn't understood until they found her in the kitchen. She handed it to him. "These are the pillars for the grace table. I've been rewriting our mission. It's no longer just cultural preservation. It's about restoration, community, spiritual nourishment." He opened it carefully. His eyes scanned the first few lines. One entry read, "We prepare meals not to impress, but to redeem. We gather not to consume, but to remember." He touched the ink with his fingertips like it might fade if he blinked too hard. "I want to help," he said. "Not lead, not fund, just serve, however you'll let me." They stayed up till the call to prayer sounded just before dawn, and even then, neither moved. They talked about grief, about failure, about the sins of their fathers, and the choices they could make that would not be repeats. They prayed, together, clumsy and honest. They read Psalm 85 aloud from a Bible Yvonne kept tucked in her suitcase. Mercy and truth have met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to, because mercy had entered the room. And when the sun finally rose, filtering through gauze curtains and warming the wooden floor, Yvonne leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Not as a promise, but as a start. That was the first day of their courtship. Not the fake kind, not the broken one, but the real kind, anchored in slowness, in scripture, in service. They didn't hide behind charm or chemistry anymore. They chose transparency. They chose God first, each other second. And they didn't call it love yet. They called it obedience. Accra, Ghana, the grand opening. The courtyard buzzed with voices, soft, reverent, hopeful. A string quartet played beneath the canopy of neem trees. Children handed out hand-printed menus listing dishes not by region, but by memory. Mama's jollof, Ashanti spiced tea, Grandma's kimchi stew. A sign above the entrance read in gold script, "The Grace Table, man shall not live by bread alone." Yvonne stood by the doorway, wearing an ivory blouse, a tailored indigo skirt, and a single necklace, a gold crucifix that had once belonged to her mother. Her curls framed her face naturally. No performance, no flash, just presence. She watched as guests entered, as laughter echoed through the open-air kitchen, as her team, once volunteers, now full-time chefs, archivists and researchers, shared not just food, but home. Jaewon stood beside her, hands tucked into the pockets of his cream linen trousers. His nonprofit, Nourish the Ground, had just finished its first community kitchen in Busan and a seed planting initiative in the Philippines. He'd quietly funneled the payout from his forced resignation into restoration, not headlines. "Did we really do this?" Yvonne asked, eyes still forward. Jaewon smiled softly. "No, God did. We just stopped resisting." She glanced sideways. "Speak for yourself." "I kicked and screamed." He chuckled. "I watched." As the ceremony began, Yvonne gave a brief speech. "We created this not to be the loudest table or the most prestigious, but the most honest one. Here, food is remembrance. It is prayer. It is healing. And this table, like grace, is open to all who come hungry." The crowd applauded. But when the ribbon was cut, when the cameras moved elsewhere, when the celebration shifted into community joy, Jaewon quietly took her hand. "It's time." Seoul, South Korea. 10 days later, the boardroom of Han Global was just as cold as Yvonne remembered. Polished black table, glass walls, controlled air. But this time, she didn't flinch. Jaewon walked beside her in silence as they entered, each step deliberate. At the head of the table sat Chairman Han Byung-shik, flanked by his legal team. The board members murmured among themselves, some curious, some furious. "What is the meaning of this?" the chairman snapped, barely glancing at Yvonne. She placed a black folder on the table. Jaewon answered calmly, "A reckoning, not vengeance. These are financial records, export logs, internal memos, proving your unauthorized agreements with shell companies used to manipulate land and food policy in West Africa. You displaced local farms. You laundered profits through a third-party network tied to Han Global's expansion." A senior board member flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising. "This is authenticated?" Yvonne nodded. "Every page." The chairman sneered. "You think this stunt wins you moral high ground? You think we'll hand you back a seat at the table?" Jaewon leaned forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it hit like thunder. "I don't want a seat at your table. I built one with truth. And while you scramble to keep your empire clean, we're feeding the people you ignored. One grain, one child, one story at a time." The silence that followed was suffocating. The chairman stared at his son, not with anger this time, but with something far closer to fear, because he saw it now. The boy he once tried to control had become a man he could no longer command. Yvonne gathered her things. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just said, "We're not asking for retribution. We're setting things right." Then walked out. Few days later, back in Ghana, they sat under the stars on the rooftop of the grace table, the wind humming over candles and clay pots of leftover stew. Jaewon turned to her, gaze soft. "You were incredible." "I wasn't angry," she said quietly, "not even afraid. You weren't supposed to be. You were free." They clinked mugs of ginger tea, and Yvonne whispered, "We didn't just survive the legacy they left behind. We rewrote it." Seoul Central District Court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, silent flashes capturing each detail. A translator whispered into the ear of a West African legal observer. A judge read the charges aloud in a crisp, flat tone that made billion-dollar crimes sound like accounting errors. Han Byung-shik sat rigid in his seat, until he didn't. Just as the third exhibit was introduced, an authenticated ledger detailing bribes to displace farming cooperatives in northern Ghana. His face lost all color. He reached for his chest. The room stirred, and then collapsed. He was rushed to Seoul National University Hospital with what the doctors later called a serious cardiac event, exacerbated by untreated hypertension and acute emotional distress. The media called it karma. The board called it inconvenient. But Yvonne called it something else entirely. 2 days later in the hospital, Yvonne stood at the edge of the sterile room, arms crossed, back straight. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a slate gray blouse, flat shoes, and the quiet certainty of someone who no longer carried fear in her body. Chairman Han lay in the bed, pale, wires trailing from beneath his gown. The room buzzed with the soft rhythm of a heart monitor and the beeping of an IV. He opened his eyes and blinked slowly. "You," he rasped. "Yes," she said evenly. "Me." Silence stretched between them like glass. Then she stepped closer, just enough that her voice would land clearly. "I didn't come to forgive you." He said nothing. "I came because I needed to say this to your face while you were still breathing." She took a breath. "You tried to break me. You used power to erase the people who reminded you of the woman you could never control. You thought fear would keep the world in your image. But you lost." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. She stepped closer. "And even now, I won't become what you are. Not bitter, not cruel, not small. You taught your son to hide. I taught him to stand. You built an empire. We built a table." A long, empty pause. Then she said, softer, "I don't forgive what you did. But I forgive who I might have become if I had let your hate shape me." She laid a single item on the table beside the hospital bed, a white envelope, elegant, unassuming. He glanced at it, but said nothing. Yvonne turned to go. "You're not required to come," she said as she reached the door, "but you're not forbidden either." Back in Ghana, the camera lingers on the envelope in Jaewon's hands. He opens it slowly. Inside, on thick cream paper, Han Jaewon and Yvonne Bennett, with hearts full of truth and peace, invite you to witness the beginning of their covenant, not to rewrite the past, but to build what could never be bought, a future rooted in grace. He smiled as he read it, and looked up at Yvonne, seated across from him. "You really gave him one?" "I gave us one," she said simply. "An invitation should never be a weapon." He reached across the table and took her hand. No ring, no grand announcement, just presence and a promise being fulfilled in steps. Just before sunset, The acacia tree stood tall and wide on the edge of her family's ancestral land, its arms reaching toward the sky like it had been waiting. Beneath its shade was a woven mat, a small table with clay cups of hibiscus tea, and two low stools facing each other. Nothing extravagant, no garlands, no floral arch, just the tree and history. This was where her father had knelt, shy, awkward, in love, and asked her mother to marry him. And now, Yvonne stood in the same spot, barefoot in a linen gown that brushed the earth, curls wrapped in a gold scarf, heart quiet but steady. Jaewon faced her in a white cotton tunic, sleeves rolled to the elbows, his mother's pendant around his neck, and a prayer in his chest. No crowd, just the wind, just them, and God, a local pastor, old and smiling, stood between them. No microphone, no stage, just this. Marriage is not the end of a story, he said. It is the first page of a covenant. One that is built not on perfection, but on truth. Not on desire, but on surrender. He stepped back. Let them speak. Yvonne looked into Jaewon's eyes and began. I do not vow to complete you. I vow to walk beside you, when your faith is strong and when it trembles. I vow not to fix the past, but to let God rewrite our future. I promise to challenge you, protect you, and remind you who you are when the world tries to make you forget. Her voice cracked. And I promise to love you with open hands, never possession, always grace. Jaewon took a slow breath. I don't bring perfection to this covenant, he said. I bring scars, surrender, and truth. I vow not to be your savior or your source, but your servant. I vow to honor your calling even when it's bigger than mine. I vow to forgive you quickly, pray for you always, and build with you slowly. He reached for her hands. And I vow to never again confuse legacy with love. They bowed their heads. The pastor prayed. And when he said amen, the wind moved through the branches like applause from heaven. Later, that evening, they sat cross-legged on a mat beneath the same tree, now glowing in twilight. In front of them, a single shared bowl of fufu with groundnut stew, next to a side of homemade kimchi that made Yvonne laugh out loud the moment she tasted it. Jaewon grinned. Too much garlic? She held up a finger. No, just enough betrayal. He tossed a peanut at her. They laughed like friends, like best friends. No press, no champagne towers, no designer hashtags, just two people who had walked through fire and chosen each other not as rescue but as response, a quiet answer to a broken world. As the stars blinked awake above them, Yvonne leaned her head on his shoulder. Jaewon looked up, eyes misted. Then her voice came soft as breath. We were never supposed to be. A pause, then a smile, but grace never followed the rules. The end.